When I came to BC, I was a cocky kid. I was convinced that in the next 5 or 10 years I would have all the answers. I would know exactly where I was and where I was going. But as I became a little less arrogant and read a little bit more, I came to this realization from a quote by Socrates. I know one thing, that I know nothing. I will preface this by saying, as many of you have, that these are in no way universal truths, nor do they necessarily apply to any one of you, but are what I have learned from my experiences thus far. So even though we will assume my complete incapacity of yielding any sort of valuable or coherent thought, I'm going to talk to you about two things, touch and pain. And so we will forge on and hope that I can come up with something that is not a complete waste of your time on the subject. I apologize in advance that this timeline will weave in and out and won't quite be sequential. So let's begin. I remember the searing pain as my parents pulled back the skin from the pins that were sticking into my leg. I remember holding my back with the screams. I remember watching my mom tear up as she was doing this to me. I remember the countless shots. I remember the infinite finger pricks. But I don't remember when it stopped. I don't remember when my feeling went numb. There was a point when I decided to stop feeling. I know that. But I'm not sure when that was. It wasn't that I internalized the pain. I wasn't clinically depressed or anything like that. I simply let it go. I didn't let anything get to me because nothing could really compare to me to watching my mom hurt because she was making me hurt. I thought that this was a solution to live, to just go through life, go through the motions, and be the guy who's always happy but never really joyful. I thought I understood, but I didn't. I didn't realize the need for that pain, the absolute joy that it's associated with its absence, the gratefulness for being able to reach the top shelf or run or jump, or just exist in a life that is so fortunate in so many regards. My grandmother has a saying that she has reiterated to me on several occasions. I'm always amazed that for how much that can and should fail in this life, the fact that so much in it goes right. My junior year at BC, I was posed the question, what does it mean to save? It's a question that has surrounded me throughout my life, from growing up surrounded by a family in medicine. However, the medical definition of saving someone's life falls short for me. If we solely keep someone's heart beating even though they are on a ventilator, have no brain function, have they actually been saved? I think Flannery O'Connor gets closer to it in A Good Man Is Hard to Find. In this short story, a serial killer is posed as a hitchhiker, and he stops a family and kills off each member of the family one by one, until only the grandmother, who has been selfish and complaining all day, remains. It is in the moment that the grandmother reaches out and touches the murderer in a sign of compassion that she accepts the murderer as her own child, that she realizes our interconnectedness, and it is this moment that she is killed. Because it's in this moment that the grandmother commits the selfless act, and in her touch she saves her son. As I said in high school, I was a cocky kid. I was one of the top in my class. I had this great Jackson legacy going for me. I played a bunch of sports, had the girl, volunteered a ton coming into BC. You know, I was basically that stereotypical BC student. However, only a few of those things remain to this day. I was comfortable and I was confident. I knew I wanted to be a doctor, but I was a quiet kid and I was complacent. Joby pulled me out of that. Joby was a student at the campus school, which is a school for children with multiple severe disabilities and complex healthcare needs. I volunteered with the Eagle Eyes program with Joby. This allows students who have very limited mobility, are nonverbal, to be able to control a computer mouse by using their eyes alone. It gives these students a voice for the first time in many of their lives. I remember the first time I walked into that class. I felt a huge sense of awkwardness. I wasn't sure if I could touch the students. I figured they must be so fragile. I was quieter back then, so I wasn't going to speak out. But Joby pushed me. He did it without me even knowing. He didn't want to play the games that we were trying to push on him. He would pretend to sleep to try and avoid the work. I'm still somewhat convinced that he's a little upset he got me as a buddy instead of some cute girl to stare at the entire time. But we eventually got past that and we moved forward. I remember after a few weeks, one day he opened his eyes and he smiled at me. That recognition of each other was so profound to me. It was something that's so small that he did, but the simple joy that Joby showed is something I can't replicate. That way that it permeated throughout the room and warmed and infected everyone in it is something that only a few people I know can do. It is one of the most vivid memories I have of BC, that look on his face. And it was in that moment that I fell in love with campus school. The effort that Joby had to put in wasn't easy at all. He had to learn a new way to communicate. And I was finally understanding it wasn't going to be easy for me either. This was the head fake, as Randy Potts would put it, with service. That even though it seemed like I was giving of myself, I was actually receiving so much more. But this ceremony of coming in every week and being there for each other, of rooting him on, of figuring out he liked basketball and Creole music, or that he didn't like the matching game like Seamus or Evan did, of noticing these small steps that we made each week, each day, allowed us to build something absolutely remarkable. My honors professor freshman year spoke about service in this way. I remember it was early on second semester, and he was criticizing one of those 1 week spring break service trips. I'm sorry for all of you who love your APA and your Rupe, but this is what he said. Service is about getting down in the dirt with the people you are with. It's not about going in for a week and coming out feeling good about yourself. No, it's about feeling the pain that they are going through week in and week out. About falling down with them and helping each other get back up. The each other part is what is key for me. Every service opportunity always gives back to me, and not simply in feeling good about helping someone or some sense of self-accomplishment or worth, but it teaches me something grander and absolutely humbles me. Joby was picking me up. He was saving me. At this point, I still wasn't sure what this idea of saving meant, but I knew he was pulling me out of my apathetic waters. Most people, when I talk to them about the camp school, the reactions along the lines of, "Oh, isn't that so sad? That's terrible." And yes, life is not fair. And there's no reason for these kids to deserve the lot they are given. In my 4 years at BC, too many of the students have passed on. And just the other week, I was sitting over in the corner over there, listening to some of you give your last lecture with my head down, and I was trying to feel the pain without showing it. As I just learned that another student from the campus school had passed away that day. Trying to feel the pain without showing it. It's a concept with which I continue to struggle. But it isn't right that for many of the other students, they will not grow up to be as old as you or I are now sitting here. And yes, it does bring to mind a Kerouac quote in my head, as often as I bring up Kerouac quotes, that I wonder what God had wrought when he made life so sad. But these kids enjoy life more than anyone I know, and they have touched more people than I could hope to do so in 3 lifetimes. I was and still am convinced that these kids have done more for me than I could ever have imagined doing for them. They made me recognize that I was not someone I liked, and that my friends, my family, and flat out the world deserved more from me. And more importantly, they made me realize the profound impact that we have on each other by the smallest of our actions. That wake up from Joby was what made me realize the need for the struggle, the need for the pain. I had to let it in, if for just a moment, and then I could do what I had been doing for so long and let it go. I had and still have to know what it means to have this great loss. It's something that our generation has been fortunate to avoid. We have not had a Great Depression sending many of our families into starvation, or a war that killed most of our brothers, friends, fathers, sons, nor a true plague that wiped out entire communities, nor the constant fear that at any moment a bomb would go off and annihilate entire cities, countries. This is the sense of loss that for most of us, we have been fortunate to avoid, a shared communal agony. My grandfather reminds me of how fortunate I am of this every time I see him. He is one of the kindest, most patient and compassionate men that I know. He, along with my grandmother, are the people who everyone in the 3 towns around them know and refer to him affectionately as Doc and Mrs. Esper. For me, it's Grandpa and Mama. Though my grandfather was one of my earliest exposures to what it meant to be a physician, he was one of those last doctors who would routinely go on and make house calls, but it's not this about him that has impacted me the most. He was a tail gunner when he turned 18 in the Pacific Theater of World War II. But if you looked at him now, the quiet husband who stands lovingly by his wife, who will wear a woman's bathing suit just to play out the extensive sketches of my mama, you wouldn't ever guess this. He has only recently begun to open up about his wartime stories. And he still usually responds to most of the time, "War is horrible." He is one of the biggest opponents of it that I know, and his experiences with it, as well as growing up in the Great Depression, have shaped him into the kind of man I hope to come close to someday. He has shown me how quintessential pain is to the ability to have empathy and pure compassion for someone. He constantly worries that medicine is now going into a state of hyper-efficiency and is overwhelmingly focused on research and diseases instead of treating people. I will never be able to forget this because of him. This was somewhat epitomized for me in another one of those perfectly ordinary experiences that I seem to strike me so often out of the blue. We were at my brother's graduation from medical school the other spring, and the speaker was talking about when he was treating patients with HIV/AIDS before there was really any treatment for it. And this is what Dr. Abraham Verghese said, as he does it so much better than I ever could. I recall one patient who was at that point no more than a skeleton encased in shrinking skin, unable to speak. When he saw me on what turned out to be his last hours on this earth, his hands moved as if in slow motion, and as I wondered what he was up to, his stick fingers made their way up to his pajama shirt, fumbling with his buttons. I realized that he was wanting to expose his wicker basket chest to me. It was an offering, an invitation I did not decline. I percussed, I palpated, I listened to the chest. I think he surely must have known by then that it was vital for me, just as it was necessary for him. Neither of us could skip this ritual, which had nothing to do with detecting rales in the lung or finding the gallop rhythm of heart failure. No, this ritual was about the one message that physicians have needed to convey to their patients. Although God knows of late, in our hubris we seem to have drifted away. We seem to have forgotten, as though with the explosion of knowledge the whole human genome mapped out at our feet, we are lulled into inattention, forgetting that the ritual is cathartic to the physician, necessary for the patient, forgetting that the ritual has meaning and a singular message to convey to the patient. And the message, which I didn't fully understand then, even as I delivered it, and which I understand better now, is this: I will always, always, always be there. I will see you through this. I will never abandon you. I will be with you through the end. I remember looking over at my grandpa and seeing a smile creep over his face. I can't say that I know what he was thinking, but I like to think that he appreciated that even at a research-heavy institute like Dartmouth, they would appreciate the importance of the human touch being emphasized, especially in those situations that illustrate how unfair life is. This brings me to my friend from home, Ryan. Ryan is one of the kindest, happiest, and most optimistic and all-around good men that I know. He is the guy who studies so much that it used to worry us that he was spending too much time in the library and not enough in the frat houses. But he simply holds himself to a higher standard and achieves it. He will drop everything to help a friend and always is looking to include everyone and be friends with everyone. I remember going on a camping trip with Ryan and a few of our other friends the summer before our senior year of high school. How full of life he was. He just exudes happiness to all of those around him. A few weeks after that trip, Ryan's mom died of breast cancer. Ryan was possibly the sole individual I could have called a man walking through the halls that year. The way he carried himself, his sense of maturity and positivity were well beyond his years. And it would have been more than understandable for him to have been down, but he wouldn't let this change who he was and who his mom had taught him to be. 2 years later, I got a call from my mom while I was at college. Ryan's dad had died of a heart attack. But to this day, Ryan is still that kind, optimistic, good man who exudes happiness and friendship to all those around him. I'm fortunate to call Ryan my friend. The strength, maturity, and outlook that he offers is something that I try and emulate every day. And it all comes back to this for me, even with the, to me, unimaginable loss that Ryan has experienced. At such a young age, the simple and pure joy that he gets from everyday life, from warm days at nights at the cottage with friends, from playing cards and simply hanging out, is resounding to me. This brings me back to why medicine. While I've always had an interest in working at children's hospitals, I had been worrying that I would get too attached to the kids, that I wouldn't be able to handle the deaths. But the campus school, my friends, and family made me realize that I needed to reevaluate this thought process. The first baby I got to see born would change this for me. I remember a few days before I was fortunate to round through the NICU with my aunt, who has been a NICU nurse and is now a professor of labor and delivery at UConn. I talked with her about the losses, and she said to me something that has really stuck with me along the way. And this is about what she said. Yes, the losses are horrible, but if I can make the worst days in these families' lives just a bit more manageable, then that's really something for me. So a couple days passed and my rotation through labor and delivery had arrived. I remember the first room I walk into, and the resident walks in ahead to check with the family, make sure it's okay for me to observe. And they say, of course, just wanted to meet me beforehand. So I come in, the mom goes, "So what's your name?" I go, "Max," and the two parents kind of look at each other. And I go, and they go to me, "Okay, what's your middle name?" I go, "Anthony," and they respond, and they go, "Okay, good. We're letting you stay because we're naming our son Max. But if your middle name was the same, that would have been way too weird." So the delivery goes on, and then I, in my estimation, am doing absolutely nothing. I'm sitting in the corner, quiet, just exchanging a few words with the family, and as well as my residents, and then also trying to avoid the placenta that had just fallen on the floor. Thankfully, I wore leather shoes that day, and it wiped off pretty easily. And it all goes well, and it's the most beautiful process that I've ever seen in my life. Then again, I am a male who doesn't have to experience the pain of it. And as my female colleague who saw a different delivery that day, that was absolutely disgusting. I'm attempting to do everything I can to black out that memory until I have to go through it. Anyways, I thank the family for letting me here and head my way for the day. The next day I found the room the family was staying in, and I stopped in to say hello and see how everything is going. They asked me the typical things, about the program I was in, what kind of medicine I was looking to practice. And just as I'm about to leave, they say, "Thank you." I'm wondering, why are they thanking me? I did absolutely nothing. And so they tell me, "You were simply a calming presence in the room for us. We can't explain it exactly. And then when you came back today and checked in your care, we're just glad that our son will be following a good legacy of people with his name. But don't think that means we named him after you." That moment was one of the few in my life where I realized, as it was happening, its importance. This man was the one that I wanted to be. He's the one that I'm proud to be, the one that Joey and everyone else deserves to be. And while I'm not always him, and maybe not even usually him yet, I'm proud to know that I can be. I hope that one day each of you will look up and have that moment where you look at someone and realize the importance of the touch you imparted upon them and how much they have affected you. So this leaves me with my last little anecdote. It was over spring break, and one night I was up at Whistler with my brother, and we decided to take these sleds up on the mountain. And when I say sleds, I mean these things were made of less material than the plastic on these chairs. Anyways, we hike up the mountain around 2 or 3 in the morning and start sledding down on these. And I just remember feeling this absolute rush. It brought me back to when I was little, sledding, and that first feeling of being absolutely out of control. The wind and snow is blasting in my face, and I can't see a single thing, even if it wasn't pitch black. And I was reminded of Paul Klee. He said something along the lines of this: "I had to learn to paint as a master first in order for me to be able to paint like a child." This is exactly why I want to work in pediatric surgery, because of the pure joy that we are reminded of constantly in our fighting to maintain the kids that infects us simply. It has taken all of this to take me back to that simple and pure childhood joy. All of the pain care, the finger pricks, of learning from friends and family, of being there for others and realizing and accepting them being there for me, of realizing what gratitude truly means and how lucky I truly am. It all comes back to that quote from Obama, and for all of the pain and misfortune that has affected those around me as well as myself, it's been amazing how fortunate and how truly blessed I have been to have all of the opportunities that I have had, to have shared in all the joys as well as the lows, to have learned as much from every one of you, and to have been fortunate enough to have been touched by each of you, and to have been surrounded throughout my life by such amazing people who I can not truly do justice thanking. So thank you for having lent your ear and shared in this amazing opportunity.